Hey everybody, thanks for joining us on Analytic Stories. And today I have got Sir OG, Chuck Hooper. I've given him all kinds of titles over the last couple of days.
Yeah, I thought OG stood for old guy.
Yeah, you got more energy than a lot of the folks that we run around with at the conference, that's for sure. Although this year, obviously, we didn't get to do that. So thanks so much for being here. I'm really happy to have you on. I think you're going to really give some great ideas to our folks today.
I hope so.
You definitely will. So just a couple quick housekeeping things, folks. We're being recorded, so you can come back and listen to Chuck's wisdom as many times as you want. And we're not going to be doing Q&A during this session, but if you have any questions, just write them in below the video window and we will do our best to get back to you. All right, so we're jumping in right away. So I want to kick this off because I really want to tap into your storytelling superpower. I know you're very passionate about storytelling. And this is something that takes time to develop a skill like this. It's not something you can just read a book or watch a couple of videos and be good at this. And I think especially as it relates to analytics and data, storytelling is a whole nother area that people need to develop their capabilities in. So now, having said all that, about how long it takes to build your skill, is there something that you could talk to us about that we can start practicing right away that you think will help our ability to tell stories about data?
One thing?
We'll start with one. You got to start with one, right?
Yeah, okay. Let me think for a second. Having one thing they can start practicing now. When you're looking at doing any kind of analytics, the one thing I would say is look for what is missing. What do I mean by that? Let me give you a quick story to make an example of it. About 10 years ago, my 5-year-old granddaughter wanted to do some painting. I was babysitting. And I got her watercolors, paper, brush, little bowl of water. Took the brush in the water, put it in all the different color paints, and then just bam, 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 all over the sheet of paper, and held it up 10 blotches of color and said, "Grandpa, do you like this?" "Yeah." "Do you know what they are?" And I just thought I'd be nice and say, "Yes, they're beautiful butterflies." And she throws it on the ground and says, "No, they're puppy dogs." We go through the same process again, holds up another sheet of paper. I'm an analyst. The last thing she had were puppy dogs. So when she asked me what these are, they're kitty cats. She crumples up and said, "No, they're horsies." We go through it one last time. She holds up this thing with 10 blobs of colors. And I ask her if I can guess a few guesses. And she says, "Okay." So I went through the alphabet: aardvarks, abacuses, accountants, Adam's apples, aerators, affidavits, aggravated grandpas. But I go through the alphabet over and over, and I can't come up with anything. She's just saying no, no, no. And I finally say, "I give up." And she says, "Grandpa, sometimes they're just dots." And the first thing that hit my head is how many times as analysts have we gone through and looked at something? We see a scatter plot with no outliers. We see a bar chart, they all look the same. There's nothing different. They're just dots on a screen somehow, and we're getting no insight. What we have to do is look for what is missing. And by that I mean the causal and influencing factors. When you look for what's missing, you're looking for those things that cause what you're seeing to happen. An example that I might use is if you're analyzing the sales of something like ice cream or charcoal or beer, you're going to see spikes in the summertime. Understanding the weather, is key to understanding where those products are going to sell better. But it's more than just weather. Let's just take charcoal as an example. If you're trying to understand how to get the right product at the right place at the right time, and your product happens to be charcoal, the causal and influencing data is not just the weather. Nice weather, no rain, summertime, charcoal grilling, right? You know where one of the biggest spikes in charcoal is? In the winter, February. Spikes are usually in 3 different places in the country, but they're big spikes. Where the Super Bowl is being played, what 2 teams are in the Super Bowl. There are people in the Northeast United States, New England. When New England's in the Super Bowl, they put a TV out on the patio. They put chairs all around it. They bundle up in their coats, and in 20-degree weather, they're watching the football game when they could be inside. But they've got the charcoal grill going off to the side. They're doing the same thing that the people in the parking lots are doing at the Super Bowl. Knowing the causal and influencing data is so important. Now, let me confuse you a little bit. When I say look for what's missing, sometimes we don't think something's missing because we see spikes in our data. We see outliers and we think we figured them out. I was doing work at a winery once. A company was brought in to do sales forecasting. They looked at year over year over year sales, and the trends were pretty much the same except March and April. Sparkling wine was selling sometimes real heavy in March, sometimes it was April. They couldn't see a pattern. So you know what they did? They just smoothed it and said it's an anomaly. We'll smooth it. What happened? The winery was not prepared for Easter brunch. The missing data was the day of the holiday, Easter holiday. Sometimes Easter's in March, sometimes it's in April. The biggest mistake they made is because the prior year, the spike had been in April, they made an assumption. They looked at those spikes and they made an assumption that it's probably the weather was different and was moving, climate change, we're moving toward better weather in April. Yeah. So they decided, we'll kill the March stuff, we'll just say the spike is in April. Well, that following year, the spike should have been in March, and the winery had not put out enough sparkling wine to meet the demands for Easter brunch. So the thing you have to deal with, like I said, is look for what is missing. You're always searching for that causal and influencing factor. And it's not always as easy to figure out as, well, I just have to add weather.
Yeah.
There are other things. Go ahead.
So what it's making me think about, and I think those are a couple of great stories for people because they're very relatable, even the ones about your granddaughter for sure. What I'm hearing in relation to a story is that the story is not just the numbers in front of you. You have to think about the whole thing, right? So like you said, the charcoal in New England, the story is that, hey, that's what people do, right? The whole picture is different. And the part about when Easter is, there's a story there that people have to uncover. So how do we, as you said, analysts who tend to go like this and look down at the papers and look at the numbers, how do we change some of our habits or build our skills in a way that let us be more open or think about these kinds of things that you're raising to find those and be more aware of them?
Yeah, let's make that more the storytelling thing. And keep in mind, it's storytelling, not story showing. A lot of times we try to say, well, let's just build a chart that tells a story. That's really tough because that chart's a very, very static image of something. The story has to have the passion in it. So if you really want something that can help people now, something they can do now, learn to be better presenters. Just learn to be better presenters. Learn to get up in front of a room and present something confidently. Toastmasters, join Toastmasters. Get the skill of doing some public speaking.
Yeah, I like that. Because I think that's a big thing when I'm working with my customers. One of the things that we have is what I call doing the demo. And it's instead of just going up and if I was to show you my story, my dashboard, whatever you want to call it, a lot of times what people do is they go, oh, you click here and you click here and you click here and you click here. I'm like, no, that's
No.
that's just showing them how to operate it, right? And you want to treat it. So I say we got to learn how to do a demo of this and talk
Yes.
people through it, like you're saying, not just show it, but also talk about what it is, and give them those cases, just like you said, right, so that they understand how the pieces fit together. Like you said, one chart to me that's like could be a sentence or a paragraph if you think about a story. It's not the story. It's just and right, you got to help people understand how that all fits together.
Let me give you a quick thought. I do a presentation where I tell 3 stories with data. I show the data. I have everything needed to make a logical, well-crafted presentation to get people to feel something at the end, to get them to want to make a decision. And at the end, I ask the audience a question concerning the results of each of the 3 stories. And they always, yeah, for what I was trying to get across. And then I announce that all 3 stories were made up. The personnel study in France, made up. The pharmaceutical study in Canada, made up. I made these things up to show them that a good storytelling, a good presentation can do, it leads people somewhere.
So are you saying that if our data is bad, that once we go to Toastmasters and learn how to be a good presenter, is that what you're getting to here?
I'm saying this one final word. I don't care what the data is. I can take any data you give me and I can tell you tell a story with this data. Mm-hmm. I will tell the exact opposite with the same data.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is the presentation skills. So if you want that one skill for storytelling, it is the stage presence, the presentation skills, the passion you show, the use of specific words.
I agree with you. I mean, I can speak, no pun intended, about that personally because that's a skill that I've had to develop over the years, and and you're always developing it, right? It's one of those things that you always can learn how to get better. But let's talk about this a little bit more. And this is something that you and I had actually kind of gone back and forth a little bit about in preparing for this too. I think this idea about public speaking and going to Toastmasters is quite intimidating. Not one, maybe even just committing to Toastmasters, because I know I haven't gone through it, but I know that it's a lot of work to go through that whole program to kind of the upper tiers of it. But public speaking, or even speaking to a small group, I think is probably one of the greatest fears people have, because they're just thrown into it, right? And if nobody teaches you how to do it and walks you through it, and I know that's an area that you coach people in, and so can you talk about that a little bit more in terms of maybe times you've been, kind of had to face that discomfort and how you got over it, and how I know you've never been uncomfortable with public speaking. Probably knowing you, it probably came out, and you were going right away. But for those of us who are building that capability, maybe it doesn't come as naturally. How do we get over some of those? Besides going to Toastmasters and practicing,
Yeah.
how do we start to develop ourselves in this area? Because I really agree with you that if we can get better at presenting and having more presence, which are not always the same thing, maybe we would be doing a better job.
Well, I laughed because my first opportunity to speak in public, I was 16 years old and about to run for class president. My dad reminded me I would have to get up on stage and deliver a speech to the student body, the faculty, some of the family members. And then he said something that scared the crap out of me. He said, and maybe a local newspaper reporter. I think it was 2 minutes later when I had gone and changed my pants that I came back and realized I wasn't going to run for class president that year. There was no way. It just wasn't going to happen. My dad suggested that I enroll in a speaking class. And there's a public speaking class given a couple of times a year by our local library at the time, an adult education series. So I enrolled in this class. At age 16, I was the youngest person in the class by far. Well, the first couple of days of the class were sheer terror. But by day 4 and 5, the instructor had us, everybody in the room, had to get up and give a 2-minute speech on anything they wanted to talk about. But they had to have clarity in the speech. They had to have a good beginning, middle, and end, or as I call it, the grab, the guts, and the gotcha. This had to be clean. By the 19th day, after having done about 15 straight days of getting up in front of people, I was comfortable. Didn't mean I was good at the content, but I actually got comfortable. And there's a world champion Toastmasters speaker, Darren LaCroix, that says, you want to be better? Stage time, stage time, stage time. You get up in front of the crowd, any crowd, and you practice, practice, practice. The absolute best way to be comfortable speaking in front of a group requires 2 steps. So when I say best way, it's best ways, 2 steps. 1, practice often. And the other is know your subject, know your topic. If you know your topic so well that you don't have to memorize anything, you just get up and talk about it.
Right. Makes sense.
And that's a key to being successful. You don't want to memorize. I've seen people try to memorize a 45-minute speech. And they get up on stage and something happens, just something minor. A stand falls, something small, something they were writing on, an easel falls. It stops them, and all of a sudden,
it just
where
breaks their pattern in there. Yeah.
And they're doomed. Or they get interrupted with a question, and they don't know what to do. So practice often and know your subject. And real quick, about 10 years ago or so, Warren Buffett addressed a college class, and up front he said, I will write you a check for $100,000 right now, each one of you, for 10% of your future earnings. That's how important this degree is. I'll make that check $150,000 right now for the same 10% if you will take a public speaking class. That's how important that skill is. It will add 50% to your future earnings. And that's
find that speech. That's really motivating.
That was about the whole speech.
Yeah, it makes. Hey, money talks. So I'm trying. As you're going through this, I'm translating this back into our world and thinking, one thing that people could do if they're now hearing you and are motivated enough to say, all right, I want to do this. I think what you could do is get a small group of people together that you work with. Now, I know we're not in person anymore, but I think maybe even being remote might actually help you because you're not right face to face with people. It might actually reduce some of your apprehension. But I would say get a small group of people together that you know well enough that you already have some comfort with. So you're not just in front of, quote unquote, the room full of people, and practice in front of, tell them, right? Say, hey, look, I'm trying to get better at this. Mm-hmm. And just practice on and say, will you do it during lunch once a week? Could I do this with you? And you give me feedback, and I want you to be as candid as you're comfortable being candid with me because I'm really trying to get better. And even something like that would probably be, a good start for people.
You want to tell stories with data? You had better be good at presenting. If you fumble around with it, if you don't know what you're doing, number one, people won't listen to you. And number two, you're not going to make enough sense for someone to take things forward.
Yeah.
It's critical, especially if you have a real good story. If you have something where you look at the data and say, wow, I have an insight the world needs to hear about. But are you the one that's going to take action to make something happen? Or do you have to sell to upper management? Do you have to sell to some association? Do you have to sell to a company? Who do you have to sell to where they take the action? And I use the term, every speech you should be doing something to help make the world a better place. You can do a little bit, but if you can inspire 1,000 people to do something,
right, make a real
take that data. I've done speeches about gun violence, and I've had people that I call gun nuts, the right-wing nut jobs, we call them, joking for those of you out there. Well, a little bit of joking. But I've had people that I would classify as crazy in a way come back to me and say, I never thought about it that way. You've got me thinking about a new way of dealing with this situation.
Yeah.
I've done speeches on diseases, and people come back and say, you have me thinking about a new way of dealing with it. And that's so important.
So it is a gift but I think it's a gift that's available to us if we want to put in the work for it. I'm just going to read you one thing. I don't know if you saw it. I see the chat, a couple people throwing up chats here, and someone said, Chuck, you've inspired me to join Toastmasters. So there you go. You've got somebody who you've reached at least one person.
Do you know who that person was?
I do.
If it was Pete O'Brien, tell him to go back to sleep.
It's not Pete.
Pete's in about 8 clubs. That's why I said that.
I know. So just to wrap up, I want to hit on one more question here for you that I want to tap into your Zen a bit, because you have been a Zen master with Tableau you're a 3-time Zen master, which is fantastic. Now the thing is, for you listening in, you may not know this. Many of you probably just think that, you have to earn the title of Zen Master, but maybe you think it's just a title and don't realize that Zen Masters actually can reach a higher plane of being. It's something that a lot of people don't know. Now, Chuck, when you're in a state of Zen, what I've heard for you is that you're able to see the world of analytics moving in a very different way than most of us are experiencing it. It's kind of like, that movie, The Matrix, and Neo sees all these ones and zeros flying around. That's what I think, you're able to do. So I'm curious, what is it that you see that if everybody else knew about, here's the chance to leave the world in a little better place still. So what is it that you see if everybody knew about would make our work in our world of analytics more successful?
One word: empathy. Not the word you were expecting to make analytics more successful, but let me explain. There are really 3 different kinds of empathy. There's cognitive empathy. That's where you have the ability to put yourself in someone else's mindset. There's emotional empathy. That's when you can feel the other person's emotions. And there's compassionate empathy. Compassionate empathy is not just feeling their pain, but taking action to help fix it. Every time you deal with storytelling with data, you have to have a goal in mind. The goal has to be to get the listener, one person or a group, to take some action. The more you can empathize with those people, the more you understand who they are, the easier it is to formulate your story to try to resonate with them. And it's not just you want them to take some action. I use the example where I can get anybody in a room to take the action I want them to take by walking up and hold a gun to their head and saying, okay, sign on the dotted line or else. What I want them to do is take the action, but I want them to know they are doing the right thing. And by really understanding the empathy, the three types of empathy, we're able to get there. And I tend to summarize. You said one thing, and it's empathy. But I tend to summarize what you're asking for in three simple statements. Know your audience, feel their pain, fix their problem. When you're presenting, you're telling that story with data. If you don't know your audience, you're going to give them too much detail or too little detail. If you don't feel their pain, you're not going to have the passion it takes. And if you don't have the technical skills to have done the right analysis, how are you going to fix their problem?
It makes such perfect sense, yet I imagine so few of us actually try to do that because of a variety of circumstances. One, not having ever heard something like you just said. So that's one, just never thought about it. Two, we tend to be feeling time pressured or are legitimately time pressured because of the way we operate in this, analytics. Just, get it all together right away, and you don't really have time to think about it. And I that idea of know your audience really gets you out of the data, right? Because you don't start with the data, right? Your first thing wasn't go and play with the data, know the data. It was know your audience. You've said a couple times already, you got to be an expert and know what you're talking about, right? Which in some ways is kind of just table stakes for all of this.
Yeah, I use a story about you get up Saturday morning, you had pizza for dinner and too much beer Friday night. You get up Saturday morning, you go to the kitchen, you open up that sliding window in front of the sink, you start to wash the pizza pan, and all of a sudden there's a rupture in the pipeline and water is shooting straight up from your faucet. And you take that pizza pan and you bank the water out the window so you don't flood the kitchen. And you scream at your neighbor, I need a plumber now. And the plumber shows up. And the plumber throws his tool bag on the ground and says, next 45 minutes, I'm going to teach you how to use these tools. I'm going to teach. Is that what you want? Do you want someone to come in and educate you or inspire you? Or as the customer, do you want someone to come in and fix the problem? So when you're telling your story, the end of that story has to be a conclusion that says, here's how this data, this story, fixes some issue that audience has.
Yeah, you have to, and actually that's why even what we've been talking about here, I always focus on that. What's the thing? What do we do? How can we help people that are listening here today to fix some of their specific issues? Because I want them to be able to leave after even only 30 minutes and go back and say, I can do something. There's something I can fix based on what I've heard. So what you're saying, that whole idea resonates with me, because if you listen to something and you're like, it sounded good, but now what? right? Then it's like I'm
Yeah.
not inspired. I can't take action. Might even be more frustrated than when I started, right? Because I'm like, I almost feel it's there. It's like within reach, but I can't quite grasp it because I didn't get that important piece. And you have in the last, I want to wrap up because I know we could go on for a long time, but I want to be mindful of everybody else's, time, and your time is that I feel like you have set the bar so much higher for all of us in the last 30 minutes to go past worrying about, just the data and making it look beautiful and, things like that. That's how I feel. I hope other people have gotten that sense too about thinking about it in a different way. And you're right. I think the words you've used, those couple of things you've told us, are pretty unexpected, at least from me. So I thank you for that. Anything you want to just kind of close out with on your own?
Well, if anybody has any questions or something, they can email me or hit me on Twitter or LinkedIn or something. My email is easy, chuck@speakerpresenter.com. Fire away with any questions. I'll copy the chat. If there was anything in the chat, I will respond to those questions or comments. But thanks, Lee. This is, it's good seeing you again, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, and for joining us from the West Coast. And stay safe out there as always, and hope to see you soon. Thanks again, and everybody have a great rest of the day.